Welcome back to another episode of the Jordan Checker podcast where I'm joined by Ben Cant. Ben is a biochemist as well as a nutrition and strength coach. Ben specializes in gut health, chronic fatigue, and hypothyroidism. But in today's episode, we're going to dive into a wide variety of topics ranging from optimizing gut health, the importance of regular blood work analysis, common causes and solutions for bloating and digestive issues, how to naturally increase your testosterone, hypothyroidism, the importance of fatty fish and omega-3 consumption, how to optimize your weight loss and muscle gain journey, and much more. But if you haven't already, please do subscribe on either Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts and enjoy the episode. Well, thanks for joining me, Ben. So I wanted to start with a bit of an icebreaker sort of question. I've seen some of your stuff on Instagram before. You're lifting to Hans Zimmer quite frequently, and I wanted to know, since I reckon saw it on yours, saw it on someone else's like the day after, I'm going to have to try it. And I was like, this is beautiful. What's the anabolic effect? Like,
I don't know.
Science-based?
I didn't know that there was anyone else out there that was listening to Hans Zimmer during training.
Yeah.
During training.
Yeah.
Oh, mate, you can't trust us guys.
No.
There's something weird going on with us if we're listening to Hans Zimmer walking up to a deadlift.
It's beautiful, though. Especially when you time it. It's like, I think my favorite one is Time by Hans Zimmer. I think it's the Interstellar one or something like that. You got to go to like 3 minutes 30 and it just...
Yeah. It hit me when Spotify did your yearly wrap up.
Yep.
And it was just like, you are like in the top 0.1% of Hans Zimmer fans. And I was like, it makes sense. So
I was going to say, you're worrying that there's... that may mean, depending if you're listening a lot, there's maybe a lot of people out there as well that do listen to it.
Exactly. Nah, look, for me, I just get into patterns of listening to certain things when I'm doing certain things. And strangely enough, like that type of music is something I listen to during training. I'll listen to it when I'm just like trying to find flow with work. You know, so whether it's just like nutrition work or like writing programs or consultative work and stuff like that, it's just something I find like a nice kind of background to allow me to get into that zone.
I get the lack of vocals probably helps as well a little bit, not to get messy in the head anyway as well. But it is interesting. There must be some science behind it, I'm sure. Like whether it's like those binaural 40 hertz beats or whatever. Like that's supposed to send you in that flow state as well. I imagine there's something to it. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Like I think I've experimented with different music types during training sessions back when I was probably taking training a little bit more seriously than I am now. But I think inevitably I was just always one that would fall back into just being boring as batshit. You know what I mean? I would listen to like the same song on every top set. You know what I mean? Or the same 2 or 3 songs, and I would like time them so that they would fall in line when the dumbbells would go up or something like that, and then I'd give it a good crack.
Beat drops and you're just like, we're in now, like straight in, perfect.
Yeah. I could never do any dance or anything like that, none of the hardcore kind of stuff. I was always like I'm an 80s, 90s kid, so probably like the Limp Bizkit, Korn, that kind of music early on. And then in my finer age, it's gone to Zimmer, mate.
I was going to say, I won't tell you my age, but I don't have that in my list, unfortunately. I'm like, who the hell are these guys? No, but that's good. So diving into kind of like the health and fitness side of things then a little bit more. I was listening to a Rich Roll podcast with Chris Paul not that long ago. And, they mentioned like leap test, something along those lines. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that. Ultimately, like testing your bloods and trying to find whether you can eat, like what foods are, suited to you more personally. Yeah. Is that a big, woo-woo, wah-wah sort of scenario? Or is there any, solidity to that as well? Validity?
Look, I mean... Did you ever hear the book, Eat Right for Your Blood Type? No, before your time too, bro.
Yeah, 2000 born.
It sounds similar, and like the thing is that like when I've looked at the research into that, like it just doesn't seem to stand up to like a lot of rigor. Yep. So it's not something that I've implemented going, hey, like based on your blood type, for instance, that these are the foods that you should focus on or stay away from. These days, instead of blood type, it might be a look at certain blood markers. And then I think that potentially can carry some weight. It really depends on what type of advice you're going to give. So an example of this, like literally I was looking at some blood work yesterday, and a new client had a very large red blood cells. Now we know most of the time in an otherwise healthy individual that's probably going to be because of either a B12 or folate insufficiency. They're both B vitamins. And in their absence over the last 3 or 4 months, which is the lifespan of a red blood cell, you're just going to end up with these big red blood cells. And that's no good, because if they get big enough, they can't kind of do what their main job to do is, and that's go and deliver oxygen off to your brain and your peripheral tissues so that you can make ATP, which is kind of like the currency of life.
Yep.
So if we see that in your blood work, it makes sense to be having a conversation about, hey, like if we didn't know B12 status or folate status, we can make probably an underlying assumption that it's probably not great, and then start guiding us towards those types of foods.
Yep.
Now, this particular client her protein intake was probably around about 40% protein shakes, about 40% chicken, and then about 20% miscellaneous stuff. So a little bit of red meat, a little bit of whatever. But these are the types of things. And she was a really health conscious person. I would say doing healthy nutrition and like a cross-training style for 20 plus years.
Yep.
You know, really, really committed. However, in that process, you can just end up kind of falling into particular kind of themes to your nutrition in which certain micronutrients may not be that high. So this was just a fairly clear case to me of saying, oh, hey, look, I think we should reprioritize some of the, like, how do you feel about going towards more B12 rich foods, you know, such as, you know, red meat, or getting in some seafood, or, you know, sardines and liver and those kind of things, of which that conversation just yielded the fact that red meat would be a go, but there's other things were a little bit too exotic for her. So that's just like a very simple look at like the nutritional, or the use of blood work for nutritional discussions, pertinent to the individual and based off evidence.
Yeah. So you're more probably looking, like, you're not going to run a blood test, go, don't eat this, don't eat that, based on your blood type or whatever it is. So it's more or less, hey, this is your blood results, deficient, way too much, and start to choose foods based off of that more so, rather than be like, never eat this food because you are XYZ.
Yeah, and if I may add to what you're saying, it's a little bit off kilter, but like this is very common now in the genetic reports that people get done. So I'll get people who inquire with me, or they might just mention it on social media and go, hey, like I want to get my genetics tested, and then I want you to tell me what foods to eat. And there is a component to that where it's just trying to help someone who's a little bit like on the lay side of things understand that genetics is just like the loaded gun or the blueprint. You know, it's all the other factors that come into it. And so just because you have these mild, we can call them mutations or slight changes to the workings of particular enzymes and things that catalyze reactions in the body. So in other words, basically you may convert folate into the active form of folate much slower than someone else. Yep. Okay. And so then you could read that and the report might say, based on your genetics, you should consume, 500 micrograms of 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate supplement. Here's a link to buy this.
Yeah. They've got their connections straight off the back of it.
These reports are moneymakers themselves. You spend $100 for the report, but you spend $1,000 off the back of the report. Yep. And so for me, there is some validity in the discussions that go on from that, but the relevance really comes down to, well, having a current set of blood work and then like doing a bit of a workup with like history and symptoms and stuff like that is probably going to be so much more useful than potentially doing the genetics first and then someone just and I'm sure this happens a lot, walking away from that with a report going, this is good, this is bad, this whole binary perspective of supplements and food.
Which is probably the person that's looking for the genetic test in the first place to give them a reason why they're not losing weight is the exact person and the only person that's getting the genetic test sort of thing. Like they're generally the similar sort of person looking for that reason why, rather than just being like, hey, maybe it's not quite as complex as you're thinking as well. Now, obviously other layers to the health overweight as well, like there's other factors in that, but as someone that's looking at those tests from a weight loss point of view, they're probably avoiding some of the main factors they should be focusing on as well.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those ways in which people want to gain knowledge over something that they don't, is currently missing, thinking that it's some kind of missing link.
Yeah.
That we all have this inherent thing of like, maybe I'm special.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I'm famous for saying you're not special. You're not a special snowflake.
Yeah.
You're just like all the rest of us.
Yeah.
We all are. Where these reports can come in handy is like if you're getting stuck with certain things, like, for instance, you may be consuming a diet that's adequate compared to the output and everything you know about your health, and then seeing very stubborn kind of blood markers or very stubborn progress in symptoms that you're trying to improve or something like that. And under the right guidance with the right people, and then, having that person with the 30,000 foot view say, look, based on the effort that we're putting in here, our returns are pretty abysmal. You know, there may be something here that's kind of like making this a little bit harder. And that is where a lot of the time some of these individual characteristics and changes that we have become more significant.
So then these things, these changes that, you have versus me, is that mainly you're going to find them through blood work? Therefore, you would recommend that, everyone is every 12 months getting their bloods done and speaking with someone like yourself. If you've got a good GP, maybe talking to them, but being careful going down that route because they're not, trained as per se to analyze to the extent that someone like yourself would be.
Yeah, I think that getting your blood work done now has never been as easy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You have like third parties. You do not have to go to a doctor to get a referral. You can go to a website. It's interesting because I coach a lot of people from around the world and sort of seeing where their systems are at. So in Australia, I feel like we are fairly fortunate with what we have at our disposal from a private setting. And the costs that go along with that, it's really not too bad at all. So I think especially if you're listening and you're from Australia, you have access to these sites where you can order your own tests. You don't have to see a doctor. You can, they will email the results back to you. And then you could take those results to, someone to be interpreted as well. So I think that's A, it's never been easier. B, it's fairly affordable, especially because in the last 12 months even, I mean, in Australia alone, a lot of practices have put up their prices 3 or 4 times. So going to the doctor is not as cheap as what it used to be. Finding a doctor that bulk bills is way harder than it ever has been. And so, I can't really comment on what it's like to work in that side of the mainstream medical model, but it does appear that for whatever reason, like there are certain financial pressures now that are being passed on to the consumer, the patients, which is just more than anything going to probably emphasize the opportunity that exists to do it privately by yourself and then seek out some other form of practitioner.
Which might lead you to find someone that's, specialize and niche down in that area anyway, which might bring greater good anyway to the person that's looking for that as well.
100%. You know what I mean? So, I mean, doctors should be doing what doctors do, which is like look for disease, you know what I mean, have like interventions that are suitable for that. But particularly on this conversation around nutrition, they're not trained in nutrition.
No.
They're not going to have relevant advice. They're not trained in supplements. And, like they'll say things like, oh, your supplements are expensive urine. And like, if a doctor says that, you should run. Because like, honestly, what that's showing you is that anything outside of their scope of practice, they're basically going to ignore, evidence-based or not. It's just a silly thing for a scientific-minded, critical thinking person to say, Instead, it should just be a case of like, hey, that's not what I do. I have a referral for you, or this is the type of person you should seek out for nutrition and that kind of thing. Yeah.
And I guess it comes to the point where we were saying just before we started as well of like why someone that's wanting to go online should do PT first, because from an online PT coaching sort of point of view, because you're going to walk the walk, understand people a little bit better as well. Same thing, that doctor hasn't walked the walk the same as someone going straight to an online business with someone in a gym as a nutrition weight loss client necessarily. They just get them to sit in front of them. They don't have the time to talk, and those people accidentally say things they didn't mean to say about family life, about like, oh no, I did eat that, because you go to the doctors, it's 20 minutes and you're out. So having that, going down that specialized approach is a much better option than just running straight for a GP in a lot of situations as well.
And it's like anything, like I'll be the first to put my arm up and say that if you're going to look for like bloods analysis from, like someone who's an expert in nutrition and stuff like that, you're going to have good and bad people in that industry, just like every industry.
Everything,
it's unfortunate, but it is the way it is. Like my inquiries are full of people that have been through, whether it's the mainstream model or a complementary model, spent thousands of dollars sometimes, been through half a dozen to a dozen different specialists. And it's unfortunate. And then, I get that call and it's like, you feel for it. And you sometimes that they've gone down the wrong pathway. And that's, again, one of the unfortunate things of like trying to find help when you're not necessarily well is how do you curate all of this information out there at the moment? There is so many forms of information. There are so many experts, all over different platforms of media and stuff like that. And so trying to filter through those to find the right person is hard.
And in a world where the GP that we used to run to, now we run to online someone with 500,000 followers over someone with 5,000 that actually knows way more.
Yeah.
It's kind of now we're in this new space, this new digital world where we're actually like, we don't know how to filter this. And we got someone like myself bringing a podcast, whatever, like obviously, hopefully then I can be the person like others and guide and have the more consistent, but there's plenty, and won't name names, that big podcasts that have people on that spit shit, and that one person says don't do this, then they get the next guest on and they say do this, not what he said, and then it's like, hang on, I'm listening to the same podcast with 50 different opinions on these sort of things. I don't know how to filter.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's part of the game. Maybe you do have to keep going until you find that person that clicks.
100%. Like it's interesting because like just this week, my wife and I were talking. So like we've got like 3 little boys, and we've got some health issues with one of our boys, and so we've been looking into things, and I'm sort of like, hey, I don't really deal with kids, you know what I mean? So whilst I feel like I'm a researcher, I can't help it. That's what I do on my Friday nights. You'll find me sitting back, wife's there watching a movie. She's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm researching the latest papers that came out in quercetin. She's just like, of course you are.
Sounds like a fucking fun Friday night.
Like, let's go. But I have no practical experience looking after kids. So like, I'm like, and my wife's a naturopath as well, right? So she's from the industry too. And so I'm like, hey, let's find out the right people to get involved here. I love nothing better than reaching out to other practitioners. But that process in and of itself is exactly like what, general population has to go through. And we turn to each other and go, imagine we weren't who we were, and kind of having a much greater ability to filter because of our...
Like if you're an accountant or a teacher, you had no health and fitness understanding whatsoever, you're just going to go, they were close, decent price.
Yeah.
Good enough for me.
100%. And maybe our standards are high because of, who we are as well. But we do turn around and go, man, it must be so overwhelming for people that everything's new to, and they can't really understand lab report tests, and then like looking at what's this qualified person versus this person. Like, what do they do? I don't understand the difference between them. And then you've got finances and stuff like that.
And you got guys, you can flash that you've got degree, but you can still spurt shit. Like it doesn't mean that you're going to even give out good information either. And I wonder then, as someone that is in the industry, is there things people should look for? Like, is it if someone's selling extremes, that's probably a sign that's the number one. Don't go there.
Red flag, yes.
Is there anything else that people can look for?
Mate, I think actually like refusal to get on podcasts is a bit of a red flag as well.
Yeah, that's true. So you put yourself in the clear today.
Yeah, that's right. No, I think like it's funny because like that's a bit of a litmus test, isn't it? Is when someone who claims to be an expert or releases content and does it in the safety of your own studio and not in an interview or not in a teaching process or anything like that. It's pretty easy to read and not understand and come across even like not looking like the part. But if you're just casually,
you can record it 20 times to get 50, 100 to get the right thing, whereas you're going straight off what's up here today. I'm not editing it. Like you have no choice. And so you get exposed very quickly if you're not actually knowing what we're talking about.
And I know people who won't go on podcasts for that very reason, because they've built a brand that's amazing. It's been very financially rewarding, and like to their credit, it's not like they're just taking money and running. Like a lot of these people are getting results in their different fields, but they wouldn't get caught dead, potentially exposing some of the things they don't really know.
Yeah, it's interesting. On last podcast with Sam, he was talking about like because he in the more maybe talking about the e-commy sort of space. Like if you see dudes with the Lambos and all that sort of stuff, it's like look for the long form content to find that they can prove who they are is who they say they are is who they are, sort of thing. To your point exactly there. Like if there's no long form content on someone, they're willing to kind of open up the gates and expose themselves. And even then, another layer again, I'd probably add as well is like be on podcasts where they get challenged as well. Like not just sit here and be like, okay, cool, no worries, and move on. Like someone be like, you sure? Like just a little question like that can throw on off the script, I guess, as well. Yeah,
like the thing that I've always said, and I think it's a really interesting experiment or bit of homework that people can apply is like, if you hold a position on something, and you get challenged on it, it's like, well, are you willing to take the opposite side of that position just for argument's sake? You know what I mean? And I do this, like, we all have our biases, we all have our beliefs, and they build up for a number of different reasons. And, you know, one of the things I always do whenever I'm starting to hold a belief quite tightly, you know, I'll just sort of say, hold on, we'll take the opposite perspective for a sense, argue against it and make a position for the against rather than the for. And people that are kind of like unwilling to do that, like there is no other way than what I'm putting forth, those, as you point out, they're usually the most aggressive in the way that they're trying to appeal, you know, to the attention of the consumer, and that they have the solution and they're offering something which doesn't have a counterpoint to it as well.
Yeah, it's very extreme. Like try and prove yourself wrong in order to prove yourself right, sort of thing. As well.
The reason they get so much exposure is because that appeals.
Yeah,
to consumers.
share, bang, bang, bang. Oh, do you see this, Susie? You see that? You know, go to work 100%. And I'm intermittent fasting. Now I'm doing this. Now I'm doing that. Like it's hilarious to see it all the time. Now, so diving into the nitty gritty of a few things as well. So in terms of gut health, very common topic, you know, people are throwing around at the moment. I've seen you talk about this a little bit. Yeah. How much do we actually know about this whole gut microbiome?
I mean...
Or gut health in general, maybe.
Yeah. I feel like we know a lot, but with room to know a lot more.
So, early days.
Yeah. But I do feel like we know a lot. Like, I mean, you know, in the last 10 years alone, I look at what I was looking at in research and practice back then versus now, and I feel like it's leaps and bounds. So it's not like I can say, oh, we know nothing, because I feel like we've learned a lot. Just like with training and general nutrition and blood work and stuff like that, I feel like we've learned a lot. But again, people take the topic of gut health and assume that we know everything now. Yeah,
avoid this, eat this, do this, like those extreme statements.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I think more than anything, like the more foundational principles of better digestive and gut health are just so boring to the consumer that they don't garner attention. So therefore, the way to maximize exposure again is to just make these bold claims.
Yeah. So what are the boring things, or what are ways that people can improve their gut health on like a day-to-day basis? Yeah.
Look, I mean, for myself, I think like one of the first things people need to do is actually just to take note of what they are eating. And I'm a big one for tracking. So when people sort of say to me, like, what's my point of difference? It's hard because I feel like there are plenty of people who do what I do. What I have noticed over the years now, though, is that I am just an absolute stickler for symptom tracking.
Yeah.
There was nothing commercially available that like suited what I wanted. And I would always have... Let's take a gut inquiry client here as an example. So we'd be chatting away. They'd be letting me know what type of issues, how persistent they've been, what they've tried in the past, who they've worked with, and I would sort of say, I just ask a few preliminary questions like, okay, so do you feel like you've done anything that's stuck? Like, is there some things that you think that interventions that you've tried that have made significant and long-lasting change? Yeah. And that stumps a lot of people. And other times, and I'll say, okay, so you've worked with this type of practitioner. What were the things that you focused on in there, and like, how did you go about gauging your progress or lack thereof in your follow-up appointments? And a lot of the time, these people, clients or patients, would be saying, "Oh, yeah, I'd go to the appointment, and it'd be really hard. Like, I just get in there and." You're scratching your head, you haven't seen them for 3 weeks. You're like, I think I'm better. I don't know. Maybe I am. A lot's happened. And I'm like, that is fluffy language.
Like they're trying to recall the whole time that's happened.
And recall is hopeless. Like you and I both know, you know what I mean? You take like food dye recalls, right? They can be absolutely horrendous.
So like, oh, actually I did eat that, didn't I? Like,
yeah. So that for me was a really big problem that I don't think is that hard to solve, okay? And I've definitely solved it with the way that I have my processes, because I'm very, very big on symptom tracking. And so when someone comes to me, I'm like, it's absolutely non-negotiable that you will track these symptoms, whether it's the Bristol stool chart, so the formation of your bowel movements, whether it's me assigning like a numerical system to your bloating severity, reflux, or these other type of things, and so that we're giving numerical values to it. So we're turning kind of like, yeah, it's pretty bad, it's this, it's that, into number, please.
Yeah.
Okay. And then that number gets averaged out over a week and a month. And then, you started in January and you had a severity of 8.6. We're at February and you've got a severity of 6.1.
Yeah.
March, it's at 4.9. I can sit here and say, great, guess what? We had a 21% improvement in the first month. We had a 17% improvement in the second month. Based on our interventions and the effort we've put in, I'm extremely happy with the trajectory that's happening.
So it's something you're doing like after they eat a snack, a meal, whatever. It's kind of like an hour after, see how you're feeling, whether you're bloated, whether you're gassy, whether you got the runs, whatever it is, and then judging that.
Exactly. You figure out like when's a logical time to assess these symptoms and you come to an agreement upon that. Okay.
Yeah.
But based on, to your point, like what's something simple that people could be doing? It's just like A, taking note of what you are eating, B, having even just like a diary or like a spreadsheet or whatever that kind of makes a note of like, what type of symptoms are you experiencing? And then thinking about the preceding events from that. And what I mean by that is it's not always food. In fact, a lot of the time it's not food. It's because you slept like shit.
Yep.
It's because your stress was very high. It's because you didn't drink any water. And so I always sort of say, look, the contributing factors or preceding events to a significant increase in symptoms: stress, sleep, digestion, change of schedule, travel, all of these things. And then what happens is patterns start to emerge.
Yep.
Okay. And those patterns are really where the gold is for you then to take your energy or your financial investment or whatever it is in and focus on those areas. I'll give you an example. So I had a client, beautiful girl, and she suffered from a lot of constipation. So she was a Hashimoto's client, which is an autoimmune thyroid. That's a slow thyroid. It often ends up with poor bowel movements, skipping days, harder bowel movements, and things like that. And anyway, so we corrected this a lot. And then we went through this phase in like probably September last year, where there was a series of regressions over the weekend. And I was like, what's going on here? It's like 3 weekends in a row here where we're missing bowel movements, like Saturday, Sunday, basically nothing. And I sort of said, something's going on. What's changed? And a lot of the nutrition was the same, training was the same, water was the same. Turned out schedule was different. And I'm like, hold on. So what did you do on that first weekend? She goes, oh, well, I went to the in-laws house. I'm like, what time did you get there? She's like, oh, we had to be there really early. So we're there by 8 a.m. We were there all day for the barbecue, this, that, and the other. And I'm like, so basically you didn't take a shit at your house in the morning like where you normally would. And then you got to your in-laws and decided, I can't have a shit here. Right. Hold. So then, that hold kind of threw out like the whole schedule of bowel movement evacuation and kind of cascaded into the next day, and then that ended up with weight gain, bloating, and everything else kind of coming there, and then resolving over Monday and Tuesday. And then the second weekend was like a kid's birthday party, and then the third weekend was something else as well. And it was just, this is exactly what I was talking about, is that we could have spent time, money, effort going down a rabbit hole that was not necessary. We could have thought, it was this food, let's pull out that, it's that supplement or whatever, but it was just kind of doing the due diligence and ticking off the things that we know could possibly influence bowel movements and realizing that it was like, so we just had a couple of weekends where you were out the door before you could have your normal number 2s in the morning. You're at somewhere where you didn't want to take a shit. And then that was affecting it.
So how much then, if you're like, not everyone has a job, a life that is to a T, consistent, wake up this time, go to the gym or not, go to work, do it. Like how does someone deal with that then? If the routine is what's causing it, you kind of go, well, food doesn't seem to be doing it. Coffee's not, water's not, whatever. Is the simple thing, well, we need to try and find a way to solve the routine, or the problems are just going to continue to occur?
Look, I mean, I think a lot of the time with symptom management, we end up in option B of what you just said then, which is like, hey, this is kind of my life. It's not perfect, but what can we do? So an example of that is I just had one of my clients message me back then. He's got some gastritis and gut stuff that we've been working on. We've seen some significant progress, but there's definitely still been some things that haven't come good. He's taking a holiday in Queensland right now, and I get a message just before saying, you're not going to believe this. Like, my symptoms are gone.
Just stay in Queensland.
I've got a post that did very well off. That's exactly what I said. I said, don't come back. I said, don't come back. But I've got a post on this that did very well many years ago now, actually. And I said, so you went on a holiday and your gut symptoms disappeared. Guess what? You don't have a gut problem.
Yeah.
So, and it was more to the point that like a lot of the time we set up a schedule, and just even our like psychology and physiology around that schedule. Like there's a certain level of sleep habits and underlying stress and baggage that we're holding on to with certain things. And then, you go away from work and the cues of maybe the usual environments that you're in, and you get a lot of resolution.
Yeah.
And I've seen this over my time, like over and over again. I used to joke, like when, not that autoimmunity is ever worth joking about, but I used to say when people would talk about it, say, if they were like a Melbourne client or a Sydney client, I'd be like, just move to Gold Coast. And like that's your solution. I'm telling you what, if I was a gambling man, there's probably just as good a success on that as you going through like X amount of like time, energy, and finances, treating it yourself while you're staying in the rat race kind of cities. Instead of like living to work, just go and work to live.
Yeah.
And because I've had so many people that have either been acquaintances, or I used to own supplement stores, and I would have a lot of customers that were sort of customers, but not quite clients in terms of anywhere near what I do now. But I would do have quite good relationships with customers back when I had supplement stores, far beyond just like, hey mate, how you going? Here's your protein. And I just even remember back then just seeing so much resolution, because I wouldn't see them for a year or two. It turned out they'd gone to Queensland, or they'd done something dramatically different to their life in terms of like just a general overhaul of stress and that. And I'd be like, wow, look at that. This person can eat the gluten now, they can eat the dairy, all of these things.
So stress is evidently a massive factor in gut issues.
It's so big. And so I feel like to your options there, option A is like overhaul your life. I feel like if people did that, like we would see some incredible success. I feel like the resistance to people doing that is obviously very high.
Yeah.
But I sort of said, like, people have asked me like, what would I do if I got cancer and it was really bad and this and that? And I'd be like, look, I mean, it would depend on like what I could do with my family, but if I could organize it, I would probably just like, you would see me disappear. You know what I mean? And I would be off in Mexico somewhere.
Living.
Because I'd be setting the board up in my favor for healing and success.
Yeah.
Knowing full well that, I'm a hustler, I'm a grinder, I'm up at 4 a.m. doing my work. And that is probably not the most conducive thing for me if I was like very, very sick,
But is there like in terms of the stress itself from work as well? Like as someone, I'm the same. I just work lots, train, javelin thrower. So like it's balancing. I'm like, oh, I'm pretty fucked all the time, whatever. But like, life goes on, we'll keep going. Yeah. Is it, there's stress and stress. Like you can work lots, you can do lots, but there's plenty of people that do that and they're still like, I'm fine. Like it's, but versus the guy that's just, but I got to get there and I got to do this. And they're like all over the place. And now you're like, well, now that's fucking, you're tearing yourself apart. Is that a bit of a difference? Like you see some people, yes, they're busy. Yes, they work lots and they've got lots on their plate, but they just seem to keep a cool level head versus the person that's all over the place.
Absolutely. And this is where I don't think like talking about this kind of stuff in hard statements is useful to anyone. The reason being is like you and I, like in terms of a spectrum of like health and wellness, like we may be up at the 4 a.m.s doing this kind of stuff and still be up this end. You know what I mean? Of like, hey, things are pretty good. Like, blood work's good. Like my mental health is good. As far as I can tell, physically, I'm quite fit and well. And then what I feel like is hard is because like as part of that, that's a subgroup of a larger group of people that are up there who are unwell and just don't know it yet. Yep. Okay. And these are the people that I see quite a bit of, and where they get a bit of a slap in the face. Like the universe has probably been waving a feather for a long time, and then it decides to throw a brick. Yep. It's like, oh, you got cancer.
It's like I tried to warn you, but didn't listen.
Right. And this is the thing is I feel like a lot of very resilient people and people with a lot of self-control and discipline and stuff like that can go far in spite of poor health. And sometimes if you're not getting blood work done, or you just put symptoms aside or whatever it is, you just may not know until you get that brick. And that's not to say that the hustle and grind is causing it.
No.
Do you know what I mean? Otherwise, like I wouldn't do what I do, like to the extent all the time. I don't believe it's causation. I just think that sometimes people who I would categorize as sort of similar to myself in our behaviors, if we weren't looking at your health, you might get side-blinded because you would just keep going where other people would fall apart. And what I mean by that, I think this is what you were saying before, is that people over the other end of the spectrum, they seem to like get sick or have an immune, and then they're just out of action. Like they can't, there's no way they're waking up for it. They can't move, And so these are the people who would never even get to over stressing their bodies like that because their bodies are sort of not even getting them to that point to be able to
Is that
try that.
is that because of generally an underlying disease or something like that, or just they haven't adapted to that lifestyle? They when they were younger, it was pretty sedentary, pretty calm, pretty quiet, nothing much going on.
That's a really good
I
question.
don't know, because I personally, I remember in school, I was training and playing at least 10 times a week.
Yeah.
Plus school, and then you pick up a part-time job or whatever. I was never bothered by that. That was never an issue. And now I feel like my ability, whether it's a mental resilience as well, but my ability to do so much more, get up at 5, start work at 6, and then finish training at 7 o'clock at night sort of thing.
Yeah.
To most people go, and work weekends or whatever. I feel all right. It's, whether that's, you just kind of, it's carried across. It's been my whole life. I've always had these long days. It's just normal.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think I can relate to that. I remember, if I went back 15 years ago, it just take me owning supplement stores. I had 3 stores, probably 15 staff, some incredibly qualified staff that I had no idea why they stuck with me. I always said it to them. I'm like, why are you guys still here in retail? You're so good. But I was very, very grateful for them because they were amazing. But I thought I worked hard then. And I did work hard. Like, other people would look at me and go, man, you just work so hard. But then it pales in comparison to how hard I work now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Let alone the productivity that comes with years of doing things.
You get better at working
Getting
hard,
better at things, yeah. But it's a really good point that you raise about what is it that separates that. I don't know. I don't really think I have the answer to that. The thought that springs to my mind just initially is that people with a lot of grit and resilience just tend to be able to get through things regardless, and that's a composite of a lot of different factors. You know what I mean? Your experiences growing up, your values, a lot of internal dialogue and stuff like that.
Can't always be trained. It just kind of happens as well through life.
Yeah.
The more you build your ability to do these things, like a muscle in the gym. Over time, it builds, it gets stronger. You can lift more weight. It's the same thing. You get stronger, more efficient. You can work harder relative, whether that's maybe you can withstand more stress from out, work, family, whatever it is as well. In the concept then of the bloating and digestion, what are common causes of that? Is that intolerances to food, or outside of maybe the routine? So we know, let's say routine's good. Consistent lifestyle. They're not changing things on the weekend. That's really good, but they just seem to be getting bloated. Is that an intolerance to those foods? What else could cause that?
Yeah, possibly. I think a lot of the time with gut health, there's probably a range of smaller factors contributing to become a bigger problem. And what I mean by that is it's very common to see sort of intestinal overgrowths, or a dysbiosis in the gut, or parasites and things like that. I've talked about Helicobacter a lot, which 50% of the population has. A lot of that seem to be completely asymptomatic, and we can say perhaps it's not necessarily a bad thing. But with the particular niche that I work with a lot, which is Hashimoto's autoimmune thyroiditis, I do think it's quite a significant relationship with that, and can possibly be contributing towards that immune dysfunction that then leads to progression of that particular disease. I think something that you won't find a lot in the mainstream medical literature is something called achlorhydria or hypochlorhydria, which is a low stomach acid level, which can, interestingly enough, appear as reflux, or what's seemingly an over-acidification and a splashback or burning of the esophagus and esophageal sphincter. And so the mainstream model would look at that and say, you need antacids, you need Nexium, here's Gaviscon or something like that. And those kind of medications long-term are a disaster, okay? Because what they will do is neutralize the pH there and reduce the acidity. And that acidity is there for a number of very good reasons. One of them is it's a line of defense to kill pathogens that are coming in through your digestive tract, which happens every day. The second is that it will inhibit the breakdown of your protein. So you're having a high protein diet. Well, guess what? That's not going to go too well if your stomach can't get acidic enough. And the third thing is that it is responsible for allowing the body to get nutrients like minerals and things into a state in which they can be absorbed. And so it's very, very well known that those medications long term can influence things like bone mineral density and stuff like that because of these vitamin and mineral deficiencies that you can accrue over that. And what I really don't like is that when people sometimes get these medications that are supposed to be short-term solutions, we have a model in which 10-minute appointment. Sometimes it seems that this 8 weeks that you were supposed to max be using this medication for becomes 8 years. And I was like, where along this journey didn't we have a discussion about coming off this medication, which was supposed to be a short-term medication because of very well-known side effects?
Yeah. And then all these other things are now happening as a result, and you end up paying for more supplements and more for medication and whatever.
Exactly. So, I think that's more significant than what it's given credit for. I think we talked about stress before, and that I think people not sort of just allowing themselves to have a space to eat and trying to wolf things down, in a very aroused state, So that doesn't help because it's sort of sending mixed signals to the body that, are we getting ready to dance? Are we getting ready to go to a training session? Or are we supposed to be sort of chilling out and eating and nourishing all the organs of the digestive system so that they can secrete things they're supposed to, move things like they're supposed to, and so on. And I think sleep and change in circadian, so like the sort of natural rhythms and the schedules that we talked about before play a very important role. And people vastly underestimate sometimes how much a change in schedule would affect lots of things, including the gut. If you were to talk to like vets or farmers, and we were just to think about animals, for instance, they would be so well versed in just knowing, this type of stress totally does this to fertility with cows, for instance. This type of like change in that will totally influence, this aspect of physiology or whatever we're looking at with these animals too. Yet when it comes to humans, we just think we're so different. We think,
we're special.
We're special.
There it is again. You're not that fucking special.
And I'm just like, we're just not. We're just monkeys, mate. At the end of the day. And yet we are monkeys that are living in a totally alien world from 200 years ago.
We just had a slightly bigger brain than the rest.
And it's just like so everything's changed in our environments, and if you just look now, it's like human health is not on a great trajectory on many fronts, right? And so like our nutrition scape is part of that, but undoubtedly also it's just a big multitude of factors all coming together that influence people's behavior, more sedentary, worse nutrition habits and things like that.
I guess that. And it's funny because now being in a shared working space as well, how many people now work from home, especially Melbourne, how many days did you guys lock down for? Like 350 total or something like that. That's a lot of people gain weight. A lot of people now I like working at home, and so they didn't even get out to even walk to the car. Like it's at least before they went, get on the tram, stand on the tram, then sit at a desk all day, walk to the coffee shop. Now it's like roll out of bed, eat breakfast, sit at my desk, roll off the desk, sit on my couch, watch Netflix, go to bed. It's like, well, that's not going to fucking help anything, is it?
If they allow those statistics to come out in a decade's time, we'll see if they actually allow it.
Might be waiting a while.
But it's not going to look good.
No.
I remember thinking this and saying this throughout lockdowns, and it was just a very interesting time, and it was very interesting being here in Melbourne, which was a very lockdown city, even at a global scale.
Maybe most or second most in the whole world. I think.
Was pretty up there,
Meanwhile, not to make anyone upset, but in Adelaide, I think we had like 4 days or something like that. We had one that said 7 days, and I was, the end of the world. And then they're like, after 4 days, it's all clear, good to go. I was like, oh yeah,
mate. It absolutely changed people's behaviors, and there will be undoubtedly you're already seeing changes in statistics. Like the curves of particular rates and instances of disease and stuff like that now. So I would imagine it probably continues. It was already getting worse anyway, but I think COVID would have accelerated some of those numbers, unfortunately, because that sector of the population would have had a huge change to activity and immune function and nutrition habits and all that kind of stuff.
So then how much, I mean, there's a bit of both, but activity versus nutrition, let's say very sedentary person, they have bread, the gluten seems to stir them up or something. Is if they start to get active, is that enough to potentially solve that issue? Like if they just became more active, like can it purely be how much you're not moving that causes some of these intolerances to food as well?
Probably not overly likely, but I think it's definitely should be on the whiteboard of like things that could be taken into consideration. So like one of my more common bits of advice around eating and movement is to walk after a meal. You know what I mean? Just because like it's been shown to help improve digestion, which, a better digestion often leads to a resolution or improvement of certain symptoms as well. I also think it just takes a note out of, James Clear, Atomic Habits author's book of like habit stacking. And so it's really easy when someone's got something that they're already doing to just like tack on another behavior and see more consistency in that behavior.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to recreate from scratch.
Exactly. So I really like I do it myself. If I have a meal, I then try and take a walk straight afterwards. It's a good way to get steps up. It's a good way to improve digestion. So it's kind of like a no-brainer little, change to behavior and activity that I think has a high payoff.
Shifting to blood pressure, carnivore diets, big thing at the moment. And people, then, obviously blood pressure and cholesterol levels and all these sort of things is something that the, medicine and the health world have worried about for a while. Is that a quite a risky thing to do, to go to that extreme, to do the carnivore diet? Is it the red meat that's kind of, even the carnivore guys have to maybe accept that red meat does cause higher blood pressure, or
is that what they're saying?
Well, yeah, there's a few out there, the red meat doesn't increase cholesterol. It's not increasing their blood pressure and all those sort of factors as well.
But is there people that are saying that eating red meat does increase blood pressure? Oh, cool. Yeah, I missed the memo on this one.
Which is which? Like it's so to reword maybe. Does red meat and like the extremes of a carnivore diet alone increase things like blood pressure or whatever, or cholesterol as well?
I mean, cholesterol could definitely be, but I think you can see it go both ways as well. I mean, there is a genetic predisposition towards, how you will handle saturated fats. And so you can see different outcomes in different people. I haven't really heard of the argument for going on a carnivore diet increasing blood pressure. Typically it's like looking at like, hey, what are the secondary outcomes of like that kind of diet that may yield positive or negative health outcomes? And what I mean by that is like people will say, oh, this diet caused me the greatest amount of weight loss or whatever. And a lot of the times it's because it's helped them, reduce overall calorie intake.
You've removed the whole food group. Yeah, it's probably going to be pretty
easy. If intermittent fasting made you lose weight quicker, that's because you basically said, hey, I can only eat during this time frame, and that for you was a good enough framework for you to eat less calories, and the same thing goes for other restrictive diets as well. Like a lot of their benefit do come in from weight loss. I think the more restrictive a diet gets, obviously that there is a higher vulnerability of it becoming one that doesn't offer full micronutrient intake. What influence that could have on blood pressure is an interesting conversation. I think it is probably a little bit harder to get adequate potassium on a carnivore diet than if you are one that eats legumes, tubers, vegetables and things like that. It's not impossible. It's just
fiber, one of those as well that people struggle with massively.
If you're doing carnivore, absolutely. But I think at the end of the day, like if someone does a carnivore diet and they were to lose weight, maybe remove some of the more processed food in their diet as well, it's probably, if anything, going to improve their blood pressure. I think what you have to just pay attention to is like things over time as well. Like I've got a saying when it comes to the health industry as a whole, and it's just like, just give it time, because people that are swinging, it's like a pendulum. Some people are just like pendulums. They'll be over here and they're all obsessed, right, about this facet of human health, or this particular diet, and then you see them 3 years later, and it's just like they're a completely different person with this and that. These are the type of people that are going through their own journey and probably shouldn't be educators. You know what I mean? They should probably just be like, hey, here's my journey, here's what it is. But instead, they're trying to say, everyone's got to do this. And then 3 or 4 years later, everyone's got to do that.
They got their referral code, and it's like, it's worked for me.
Yeah. And this is the unfortunate about giving like thing, but, in in a free world with everyone's got a platform and everyone's got their soapbox to stand up on, a lot of people feel that it's necessary to try and educate people based on their N of one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, you don't have to.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Shut up and go to work. You're not that special.
You can share, exactly. You can share your story, but like perhaps just chill on the everyone should do it like you do because you got this result. And, feeling well off a particular thing that you're doing for 3 months, 6 months or 12 months is fine. Feeling well off it for 10 to 20 years is a whole nother conversation. And this is the thing about, I'll pick on intermittent fasting for a second here. So if I just kind of were to talk about the typical, skip breakfast and just kind of eat from lunch to dinner.
Not that magical.
Yeah, not magical. We call it the skipping breakfast diet. A lot of the people that I talk to over many years now of doing this prefer that diet, not because it's actually got them into the results that they've gotten. A lot of these people still come to me with like a fat loss goal in mind. So I'm like, well, the initial rationale behind using it doesn't appear to have worked. Why do you think that is? Because, I just have these nights or these weekends where I do this or that. And I'm like, well, so what I'm hearing is like a certain level of restriction works well for your productive part of the morning.
Yeah.
They love it. They can go to work. They don't have to worry about a meal. They can do a meeting. They get this done or that done. And then lunch comes in, still not overly hungry because we've kind of suppressed that hunger. But then as the day wears on, things get a little bit hard. Your physiology is kind of doing what it should be doing and giving you particular signals of like, hey, perhaps I'm a little bit under from like a homeostatic perspective of like fuel right now. And then that can kind of like clash with the other side of eating, which is kind of like this more hedonic or non-homeostatic, which is cravings. And cravings have nothing to do with hunger, but they can definitely, everyone can relate to cravings in one way or another. And once you sort of combine like, those, you can end up easily going off your goal nutrition, right?
Yep.
And so I think that's an important thing to sort of remember when, you're talking about these more restrictive diets is like short-term versus long-term. Is it because it's something special about the diet or is it because it's yielding these other health effects? And a lot of them can, like any diet that is generally whole foods based and lower calorie than what people were consuming is probably going to give them better blood work, lower blood pressure, better weight management.
Yep.
And that's they're all interlinked.
Yep.
So that's why you can sort of make this argument for so many different diets in the short term, at least.
So then if with, let's say, let's keep picking on the carnivore diet while we're on the tangent. Someone is carnivore, they lose the weight, and we do know that we go, all right, long term, that's not a great idea. It's like, well, maybe even then, recommending some of these not ideal long term diets isn't also bad in the short term, because if it inherently gives them the weight loss, improvement in all their markers and things like that, they've lost the weight, they're exercising, they're doing all that, and then you can start to kind of look at some of those more long term changes as well. Is that potentially okay?
I think nearly every single one of them does that.
Yeah.
This is what I talk about when I go, just give them time.
Yeah.
You carnivore? Sweet. I want to talk to you in 2 years.
Eventually you eat fruit.
I'm not gonna, exactly.
Yeah.
This is exactly
I
what
just
happens.
want a fucking apple.
Even the more famous carnivore guys have put something in there now. It's like, there's berries and bananas and honey and this and that. And I'm like, cool. It's just like, you just give people time.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these guys, unfortunately what happens is, I forget the quote now, but it's like, once you've got a financial interest in the thing that you're advocating for, like it becomes hard to tear yourself away from that, right? Because
ego's attached now as well.
Well, so's your career, so's your perhaps your mortgage or something like that. You know what I mean? So what are you going to do? You've been selling the carnivore this whole time, and now you've got to go back on what you said. So yeah, I feel like inevitably most people do that with highly restrictive diets. It's like like a plant-based vegan diet. Like the ongoing rates of that are less than 10% or something like that.
Just because of how hard it is to stick to as well.
Yeah, it is genuinely very hard, and
probably
so
expensive as well, I imagine. Like compared to maybe the conventional diet, maybe.
Yeah, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's a situation whereby there are the more restrictive these diets are, the more there's a likelihood of things that you just have to be wary of. So. I have some clients on restrictive diets, you know what I mean? So for instance, like there would be time and place to use like a low FODMAP diet.
Yep.
So if you're having a lot of gut symptoms where they sort of fit into a criteria that it might warrant like something like a low FODMAP diet coming in to help resolve a lot of these issues. That's great, but the low FODMAP diet, developed by the CSIRO, was never intended to be a long-term diet. It was an intervention to deploy to resolve a lot of these things and then look at reintroduction. Okay, unfortunately, a lot of people will just forget that last step.
So it kind of comes to the point of the GP again, like it's give them medication and forget to do, hey, oh fuck,
the follow-up.
We didn't follow up, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And so back to my point, because, I gave you a bit of insight before about like the way that I do things with symptom tracking and this and that. And so I will say to people, like my clients all the time, I'm like, hey, so we're going to get you good, and then I'm going to take away these supplements, or I'm going to take, or we're going to reintroduce, we're going to try and fuck it up.
Yeah.
Right? And they're like this. And I'm like, I want you to understand my rationale.
Yeah.
Because so many people that you will work with and you will walk away from will never do that. And then you will never know what's working or why. Okay, and the example, I remember vividly doing in-person consultations and having a couple of clients over the years bring like shopping bags worth of supplements into the consult. And you realize that that's what a lot of people's medicine cabinets look like over the years, over like multiple years of trying to figure out what's wrong with you.
They go here, there, everywhere.
This personal trainer told me to use these supplements. This pharmacist told me to use this. I saw the naturopath, she told me to use this. My friend lost a lot of weight doing this, so I ordered that as well. And so and then they're like, I have no idea what half this stuff does. I don't know what to take. I don't know when to take. And I'm like, that's literally where people end up if there's no due diligence, there's no follow-up, and there's no system. So when I get resolution, it's just like, okay, we're going to try and I think we're done with this particular supplement or whatever it is. We really have to try and remove it. So one of my chronic fatigue clients, recently I did that and I got a you bastard like 2 days into it. I'm like, hey, I'm glad we did. Now we know you need it. Go and order it.
Yeah.
So
it's part of the game.
And this is the great thing about having clients with a lot of skin in the game, doing their own symptom tracking and having a good relationship with the practitioner or coach or whatever, is that they know that you're doing it for their best interest. It means that like if you can stop taking supplements, there is a effort, a financial thing that you don't have to worry about, an effort thing you don't have to worry about. And so and you're just making life simpler as well. You're curating down a number of interventions or mental workload of things you have to focus on. Similarly, like if you do a restrictive diet, for instance, and then you work on these reintroductions, it's like, well, you have to know what kind of resilience have we built here. And so like a way I have a discussion with a lot of, clients around symptoms might be like, okay, like there's probably going to be a threshold, like it's this line in the middle here. And currently we seem to be just below this threshold right now. And then when you have this particular trigger or whatever it is, whether it's a food or an event or a stressor, you seem to go over that threshold and become symptomatic aggressively very quickly. And so I sort of say, look, what we're really trying to do is like build this health, through whatever needs to be focused on, where this proximity to that threshold is much further away. Therefore, that you can, when you encounter these triggers, the excursion off of baseline doesn't get you over that threshold anymore, and so that's something, that takes time and it takes tracking, and then it takes challenging down the line to sort of see, are we at a point where we can eat this now or do this thing? So
yeah, perfect. When it comes to then supplementation, as a baseline, let's say like even taking like a magnesium or a zinc or something where you go, it's not just one variation of some of these supplements as well. How does someone navigate knowing which ones they should take? Like you search up and you go magnesium, and you're like, there's like 10 different variations or something like that, and you're like, someone says this one's for sleep and this one's for that. Like, how do you navigate knowing with some of those supplements that do have the different variations? What's the high bioavailability and all those sort of things?
Yeah, this is the magnesium one's one which I think that the complementary medicine field has probably just taken too far. I feel like they've nuanced it too much when you look at the literature on like the actual distinctions between what these magnesiums are bound to, and then associating like particular systems of benefit. This one's got the cardiovascular benefit. This one's got the neurological benefit. This one's got the diarrhea benefit. That's magnesium oxide if you want, to loosen your bowels pretty quickly.
And if you don't take that one.
Exactly. But look, at the end of the day, let's just stick with magnesium here for a second. I think you could make an argument for nearly any of them, and without like a context of like what's most important to that individual. I tend to just err on the side of something very simple like a magnesium glycinate, because I feel like glycine, which is an amino acid, is something that most people could probably do with a little bit more of. Okay, and other than that, I have a magnesium that I use with a lot of clients, which is a magnesium with taurine added to it. Now, it's not a magnesium taurate. Magnesium taurate is a very good supplement, but the price is very high.
Yep.
Okay. So instead, you can find a lot of these formulas that might have a magnesium with an amino acid chelate, but they'll have like 1 to 3 grams of taurine in the blend. It might be a powder.
Yep.
And I think taurine is something which people could do with a lot more of as well.
That gets a bad rap with things because of energy drinks, though, doesn't it?
It actually should get the good rap of things with energy drinks. So taurine's the thing in there that's kind of looking after your heart, while the caffeine is kind of like putting the into it, you know. So that's the reason they put taurine in there. Taurine isn't giving you the kick as such, even though I think some companies kind of like might have even alluded to that with like Red Bull. Yeah. Bull, taurine, it's kind of like playing
if no one knows what it is, you can sell it as anything, so it's fine.
Like, the taurine's doing you a favor when you mix it in with stimulants, basically.
So they're because it is like I remember even like my parents and my they're very healthy and enthusiasts. Dad's a PE teacher, strength and conditioning coach. Like they're not unaware of stuff, but still would be like, oh, taurine, like that's not good in the energy drink sort of things. Whereas let's flip that narrative a little bit. Yeah, probably a good idea that it is in there.
Yes, and this is where the confusion comes in because we have this like association with energy drinks as being bad, and therefore all the ingredients, I suppose, in that being bad. I'm assuming, I don't know, I don't work for Red Bull or anything, but I'm assuming one of the reasons they put that in there is actually so that it would have a kind of like a cardioprotective effect whilst people are smashing down probably way too much caffeine from having multiple Red Bulls per day.
On the topic of energy drinks, is there caffeine from an energy drink, a pre-workout, plus some of the other things and the stimulants that are in there with it? Is there a kind of stage where you go, oh, we probably shouldn't be drinking these every day versus people kind of, the people are out there smashing coffee like there's no tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Is there a difference in the caffeine that and how it affects your body and the other stimulants?
Not so much, but coffee does have other compounds in it as well. And if you look at the literature on coffee, like intake and just general disease and mortality and things like that, it's got a net benefit. So people who sort of got anti-coffee and anti-caffeine, I'm like, cool, but you're literally going against some pretty well-established science here. Like no one's really debating this. So, but I think there's context to it again. So what's more important is like, how are you going right now with the level of caffeine intake you're having? So again, I started another client a couple of weeks back, and this was a more of a gut priority client. And one of the things she said to me when we go down my list, it's got, how much water do you drink? How much caffeine or coffees do you have? And it was like, oh, I assume I'm going to have to stop this, we're going to do a gut protocol, right? And it's not an uncommon thing for me to hear. And I said, oh, not necessarily at all.
Is that because people know that it ruffles their guts up a little bit, makes them
if they do know that, then it is more important, right? But it doesn't always. Like caffeine's not always going to be a thing that's stimulating the gut in a negative sense and responsible for the particular symptoms that client is having. It could be. And what you just said then is if they knew that, then there's probably a likelihood that we should put that on the whiteboard again as maybe something that we need to remove and or decrease dosage.
Is it if it is affecting someone though? Is it kind of like it's a pain in the ass, no pun intended, but like it doesn't really matter if you can handle it, or it is something you should consider if it is upsetting your stomach? Be like, maybe we should look at reducing, changing what type, whether you are energy drinks, trying coffee, see if you have a different reaction or whatever it is.
There are very few clients that I take off caffeine. Yeah. Very few. And I deal with chronic fatigue and hypothyroidism. I deal with fatigue management like every single hour of the day, really. Yeah. Having said that, like the context is there. So what I'm looking for is like, okay, how is sleep going? You know what I mean? Like how the things that we know that caffeine could influence and interfere with, like what is the timing of the caffeine throughout the day? Going back to genetics before, like I'm a slow metabolizer of caffeine. So I can have caffeine early on in the day and it will still keep in my system for much longer than someone who doesn't have that particular mutation.
If you, how do you become aware of that? Is that also how quickly you drink a coffee and you're like, fuck, I'm alive? Is that, or any indicator?
Yeah. So you're probably not going to be that if you could drink a coffee and go to sleep.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But other than that, this comes down to genetic testing or just kind of like teasing out the likelihood based on, how responsive you are to caffeine or not. But yeah, I think essentially, do I think caffeine has to be removed for every single gut symptom? No. Do I remove it for it? Absolutely not. Do I remove it for a lot of fatigue cases? Not really. It's just more of a conversation around what is the appropriate amount of caffeine for that person and what cutoff time is probably the best for them.
Yep.
And that's probably the level of intervention I have on that topic, because 90% plus people with only those minimal boundaries or framework getting success, and it's not influencing the resolution of like their progression.
Is there a general kind of how long before bed you should probably be like, let's not ingest any more caffeine than I already have throughout the day though?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably where maybe my boundaries are a bit more strict than other people, and I normally have clients cut off their caffeine at around about 11 to 12 in the morning.
Assuming they're going to bed at what, 9:30, 10, or is
like a lot of people when they come to me, their bedtimes are just far too late for where they should be, and I'm just like, look, this has to be a priority. I'm a big advocate of proper sleep. I've been talking about sleep for a very, very long time, and a lot of what I do from the behavioral side of coaching is influencing people's schedules and having discussions around what it might look like to help them fall asleep and stay asleep and those kind of things. So the caffeine comes into that conversation just because, a lot of the time I feel like people are having caffeine too late in the day, and it's most definitely stopping them from getting tired at night, which then kind of evolves into habits of doing things that are going to push out the sleep time even further. Meaning, oh, great, so you're too tired to fall asleep, might as well work again. Jump on the laptop, start a 2-hour movie, those things. It's like, of course you are.
Mind stimulated, that adds to the mental stimulation.
Exactly. So the caffeine led to you not being tired. The not being tired led to you throwing on artificial light. The artificial light led to you being more awake. The more awake, and the artificial lights, now you've got lower melatonin secretion. The lower melatonin secretion is like starting to influence the architecture of the sleep.
Start to have something to eat, then you're digesting food close to bed, all those sort of things.
Or you're overeating.
Snowball. Yeah, so then you have a plethora of things that start to happen off the back of that as well.
Yeah.
When it comes to, I've heard you talk a lot about fish and the importance of like fatty fish and things like that. Now, personally, don't like fish, don't like seafood. Is fish oil a 1-to-1 substitution when you have the right amount of, is it DHA and EPA?
Yeah. So like I feel like I've been an advocate of like proper omega-3 status for a very long time, and I feel like I'm becoming the fringe now because there's so many like nutritional philosophies or whatever, like carnivore and these different kind of groups that are basically more along the lines of like lowering polyunsaturated fats in the diet. So these volatile PUFAs like omega-3 and omega-6s can cause oxidative stress, and oxidative stress can lead to inflammation and so on and so forth. So you'll get these whole anti-vegetable oil crews. You know what I mean? Which kind of line up well with a lot of the carnivores, but it's not just exclusive to them. And so, people often ask me that, oh, but how do you reconcile then like what these people are saying with what you say? And I said, it's not, what they're doing is something that I would say is not supported in the higher levels of evidence. And the thing is they won't take the opposite perspective. No. Right? It's all well and good to take mechanistic data and go, oh, I'm glad you like watched a bit of 10-minute biochemistry on YouTube and you understand, these unsaturated bonds and oxidative stress. But at the end of the day, show me in the literature on the studies that are long-term, that look at fish intake, that look at omega-3 status, and you're going to have the problem reconciling your perspective with that. And so my view is like, they have a test called the omega-3 index test. It's a red blood cell test. It's a pinprick test. You can just do it from home. You send it back to them. It's about $100 Australian. You'll get the results back, and it'll give you a percentage of red blood cells in the membrane of the omega-3 in the membrane of your red blood cells. And basically, we know from the data that having an omega-3 index of 8% plus pretty much puts you in the lowest risk quartile for many of the things that you do not want to get. Right? And having an omega-3 index under 4% puts you in the highest risk quartile for a lot of things that you don't want to get. And so getting yourself to an omega-3 index of 8% is more what I'm worried about. It's, rather than the conversation of like how much of this or how much of that, But when it comes to practical steps, here's kind of what we know on that. And it's probably, so when they've done, when they've looked at what has it taken to get an omega-3 index of 8% plus, they've looked at groups where they had like eating fish once per week, twice per week, 3 times per week, and then with or without supplements, or with or without supplements. Now, it wasn't too, unfortunately, it was like a big study where they just took the assumption that when people were taking fish oil supplements, it was around about 1 regular strength fish oil capsule per day. That was the limitations in their study. The only group that achieved over 8% plus was the group that ate fish 3 times or more per week and supplemented.
So it's a lot.
It's a lot, right? And so, of fatty fish, I should say. And so when you figure out the math on this, it works out at around about 865 or 835 milligrams of EPA and DHA per day.
Yep.
Okay. And that will probably get you to an omega-3 index of 8% plus.
Yep.
Now, I've seen many people get that result, and I have some people that didn't get that result. So I've seen some people that took a lot more than that to get that kind of thing. I have a simple rule of 7, okay, that I use with the consultative work that I do. And I say this. If you probably wanted to achieve that, you could look at having 700 grams of fatty fish per week. And for every 100 grams, under 700 grams, you take 1 high-strength fish oil capsule, which has generally got around about 800 to 1,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA.
Yep.
So the simple thing is this. You love fish. You can eat 700 grams of salmon per week. I don't believe you, but good for you. No supplements.
Yeah.
Because no one eats 700 grams of fatty fish. I don't eat 700 grams of fatty fish every single week either.
And you like it?
I love sardines.
Yeah.
I eat salmon, but I love sardines,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, I probably haven't had sardines for 3 weeks, and then I'll go binge them for a couple of weeks. You know,
It's not a consistent all the time food necessarily.
I need to get my Woolworths kind of like that regular drop-off order thing done, and I just haven't done it. So I'll go there, I'll buy 20 packs, I'll eat them all, and then I'll forget to go back and buy them for ages. And if you hate fish, you're not going to eat any, great. Guess what? 1 high-strength capsule of fish oil per day. Okay, so 7 per week. If you want to eat 1 piece of 200-gram salmon per week, that's 200 grams. So you'd have 5 fish oil capsules per week. It's the rule of 7.
Yep.
400 grams of fish, 3 fish oil capsules. Rule of 7.
Yep.
Clients love that because then they go, oh, you're putting the ownership back into their hands. Like, I don't really care what you do. Like, have fish oil supplements. I don't care.
And then they can be changing that as they go as well. Like it's if they go, we're going to have tuna or we're going to have salmon or sardines or whatever this week. It's like, well, don't need my fish oil for these couple of days or whatever. And then next week I'm not having it at all. So I'm going to have them every day. Like, it's very easy to maintain that structure still.
Exactly. And that's kind of like, again, that's the sort of extent of the sort of interference on that topic that I do with clients. The only thing I'll say with this, I do think that getting a fish oil supplement with a very good third-party certificate of analysis is a great idea because you don't want to get oxidized oils, you know, for paying good money for that. And then the other thing is a lot of these will come with maybe some added vitamin E in it. And vitamin E is a fat-soluble vitamin which will stabilize and these oils and be protective of those oils in the body as well. Okay.
The concern, I know someone's going to, if we put a clip of them fish oil, they'll be like, the mercury. Yeah. Is that a genuine thing that people should be mindful of where that fish, if they're eating the fish, where that's coming from? Is that something that can be also in the fish oil as well?
Yeah. So in these third-party certificates of analysis, that is one of the things that they will look at. So they will look at things like mercury and other heavy metals, and so like parts per million, you know, and then the ones with the best certificates will have like the highest ratings or the lowest readings in that. And then they'll have like TOTOX values, and TOTOX just stands for total oxidation values, and that's just looking at how rancid it is. So in a fish oil supplement, good ones, you shouldn't have to worry about that. When it comes to fish intake, again, this is an interesting discussion. And this grinds people the wrong way, health conscious people the wrong way. Meaning if you look, again, people get caught on the minutiae, right? So we can get caught on mercury and go, oh, what about the mercury, bro? What, you're eating all these sardines, you know, let alone sardines are a small fish, so you don't get that much bioaccumulation. If you eat lots of shark and tuna, you're going to get more mercury than sardines. But if you look at the evidence, like the higher fish intakes is associated with nearly like a better outcomes for nearly any health thing that you can possibly think of, you know. And so I'm like, you've got to take the totality of the data. Okay, you can get caught on like a mechanistic thing or a one nutrient thing, but look at what we have out there about high fish intakes or cultures that eat high amounts of fish versus other ones. Like if you look at the Japanese, for instance, you know, they got one of the highest omega-3 index statuses in the world, and you look at like what their maladies and disease rates and stuff like that are versus other cultures, and I go, you've got to take that into consideration as well as like what you know about mercury. It's the same thing as, I don't know if you heard about that recent one that came out about the levels of pesticides. And what they found is that people that had the highest vegetable and fruit intake had also the highest level of pesticide intake as well, and had the lowest risk of outcomes. Now, people don't want to hear that because we
and they're scared of eating fruit now because someone goes pesticides.
Exactly, right. But at the end of the day, what they've also shown is that there seems to be you've got to look at the net positive. And the net positive still seems to be that like a higher fruit and vegetable intake and probably a focus on whole foods, that becoming that type of person, even in the presence of like these pesticides that we probably don't want, but they're there, still seems to be preventing disease. So I think you just got to take it with a grain of salt. It's like I do what I can to buy the best food that I can, you know what I mean? But I don't let things like that bother me. It's like if I break out the sardines, I'll inevitably get someone on Instagram and go, what about the microplastics, bro?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or I got some I got Eugene Teo put up some pork crackle things, and I got them for my kids. And someone said, "What about the vegetable oils?" And I'm like,
"What about them?"
I'm like, have you seen what my kids eat?
Yeah.
Okay, not that they're perfect, by the way. They're absolutely not. Like, Instagram is the 1% highlight reel, but like, I've got my kids eating organ burgers every single day. They sit there and eat.
Not many other kids are doing that.
They sit there and eat sardines. I've somehow like worked my way into some of this really cool stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. They eat like regular food stuff as well, but I'm like, I don't have this overly restrictive sense of like, my wife and I, we definitely curate their diet, but like we also have an understanding of like you try to crowd out with good stuff, right? Because then it doesn't feel like it's restriction. And that's what I encourage a lot of people to do with like regular nutrition principles as well. It's like rather than focusing on what you can't have in this, focus on like trying to get minimums of this and that. You know what I mean? Because what happens is you displace nutrient void foods, for instance, or you are displacing higher calorie foods, and you're also ticking off goals. So you're like, yes, you get to say you had 150 grams of protein today, and yes, you get to say you had your 3 pieces of fruit. You're winning.
Yep. It puts you on the front foot of whatever the bigger journey sort of thing is as well. And I guess an easy, like a visualization of that as well. And you're talking about stress as well. If this side of the equation is way up here and there's one down here, you don't go, oh, fuck that. No, I'm not doing that. It's exactly. Like if you took that then out into business and you're like, you grow your business massively, you can do really, really well, but you're going to have to work 1 hour on the weekend. No one's going to go, nah, fuck that.
Yeah.
But as soon as you put it into health and it's one bad thing away from being like, nah, I can't do that. But then you're left, you're like, you honestly will get to the stage where you just drink water, and even then, probably not, because they'll be like, there's fluoride in that, there's this, there's that. And you're like, all right, I'll just sit on the couch, not drink anything, not eat anything. If it takes one thing for you to avoid that specific type of food.
I know it's not exclusive to the health industry, but that all or nothing kind of approach that's so prevalent, and it's something that I've said for such a long time, is that like people need to stop wearing that all or nothing like it's a trait that it's like in their genetics, and I'm like, it's not.
It's almost like, because you go, it's like the on the key ring, the Good Life Gym sort of thing. They put it there when they're at brunch. So someone is like, oh, you're going to the gym or something. It's like people go, I'm keto now, I'm this now. And it's just in the way you're speaking that you are attaching who you are to that thing, which is dangerous, because like you said before, then someone, if they make a business model off of that, it's very hard to break away from that in the future if you decided to change.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then the ego gets messy, but that's interesting. So then in terms of, you spoke about like hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, what's the difference between those? Or are they the same thing?
So hypothyroidism is like low thyroid function. And in westernized cultures, so in developed countries, 90% of hypothyroidism is from an autoimmune presentation, which is Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Okay. So,
one is step one is step two kind of thing.
Well,
like it leads
so if you were to go to, less developed countries, like they can develop low thyroid function from nutritional deficiencies.
Okay.
So if they have like an iodine deficiency or something like that, which might be common in countries where so most of the iodine comes in from the ocean, and basically what will happen is the weather systems will take the water with the iodine up into the clouds, and then they'll travel over to the land and then deposit iodine, over certain regions of the land. But there's various areas, that are very centralized that won't get a lot of iodine, okay, from the weather systems. They are far more vulnerable to a proper iodine deficiency that can lead to that hypothyroidism. In our country, it's very rare, okay, because we iodize our salts and we have all this fortification with things, which was the government's sort of heavy hand at going in there with, these mandates to try and prevent things like that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when it comes to our medical model, I don't think we have a great standard of practice for Hashimoto's. It's kind of they'll go in, they're very slow a lot of the time to catch it, because what you're looking for is the autoantibodies, which can be rising even in what we would call euthyroid conditions. And all that means is that your TSH and your hormone levels actually still look fairly normal at the start. And then what will happen is you'll have like a flare of the immune system, because that's what's happening. It's an immune problem. And then that'll send everything wonky. And that's when a medical professional might step in and go, oh, we're going to test these Hashimoto's antibodies. Look, you've got Hashimoto's. I need to send you off to an endocrinologist. The endocrinologist will look and say, yes, you do. Maybe you'll get a scan of your thyroid gland, and they're basically looking for the progression of damage that might have been done. And the intervention is thyroxine, which is a T4 hormone, which can improve some of the symptoms of hypothyroidism. So things like fatigue, cognitive malaise, hair, skin, constipation, absolutely can.
Yep.
But it will do nothing to stop the progression of the disease, which is being initiated by the immune system.
So is there a way? Is that like something there, or is it kind of let's try and delay that process as much as possible, rather than we can't really completely remove what's going on as well?
There absolutely is a way. I'm very passionate about this because, my wife has Hashimoto's, my mum has Hashimoto's.
Is it genetic then, off the back of seeing that?
No, it's like like a lot of autoimmune conditions. There is a association with certain genes to the prevalence of autoimmunity, but not necessarily it being Hashimoto's, for instance. It could present as something else as well, like celiacs and things like that. But there's absolutely things you can do to stop the progression of the disease. So I've spoken a lot about selenium is one of them. That has a ability to lower the antibodies by around about 20 to 30%. Aloe vera over a year's time, 100 mils can lower it up by up to 60%. Wow. Black cumin seed oil or Nigella sativa, that can lower it by 50% in as little as 8 weeks.
Yep.
What else will I have clients use? Aloe vera, black seed oil, like low-level laser therapy. So like red light therapy and infrared light therapy, they can be very good. There's been some amazing studies that have come out of places in Europe using those on the thyroid and absolutely abolishing these thyroid antibodies. Yep. And if you can get on top of this immune dysregulation, because what's really happening in autoimmunity is the immune system's not regulating itself well. There's various components of that that are responsible for it, and you basically see that they're not optimal. And if you can start to look at addressing that, and a lot of these botanicals or these various nutrients like selenium and stuff in this case can play a role in various parts of that. But what you do have to be careful of, and this is a little bit more of an area where it probably needs a bit more research, is if you think that, so if you were to Google like hypothyroidism, what should I take? It's probably going to come up with iodine straight off the bat, because your thyroid hormones are literally iodines with a tyrosine, so an amino acid. But in the presence of Hashimoto's, what's basically happening is there's a lot of damage that's happening to the thyroid gland, with the immune system in there and the various processes that go on to create these thyroid hormones. Giving it more iodine at that stage may actually be worse. Yep. We really don't know the answer to that. And that's why I'll sort of say, look, because we don't know the answer to that, I do not want my Hashimoto's clients taking like supplemental iodine, or even just taking a diet which is like extremely high iodine, until we've like looked at getting on top of what's going on, with with these antibodies.
And then so the effects of, so you mentioned skin, hair, all these other sort of things, but the common one that everyone kind of seems to say, I have an issue with my thyroid, is that the calories and the energy side of things, is that hypo or hyperthyroidism that's linking to that?
Yeah, so in like your thyroid in a way is your thermostat. You know what I mean? So if you have an underactive thyroid, you may have more problems with weight gain.
Yep.
You know, if you have an overactive thyroid, so hyperreactive, hyperthyroid, sorry, or again Graves' disease, if it's an autoimmune one, then you will have trouble sustaining weight, okay, because you just burn calories a lot. So patients with Graves' disease, you know, they'll often present and they can be very, very wired. You know what I mean? They're like very hot. Lots of trouble maintaining body weight. You know, it can really influence their mental state as well.
Yeah,
as it can with Hashimoto's, just in a different way.
Yeah, and so is this the hypothyroidism? Is that linked also to things like PCOS and that sort of, I guess, what would you call that? You know, when a doctor says, I've lost the word. When a doctor just says you've got PCOS, is that an aspect of that is hypothyroidism as well? Is that linked into that, or is that separate?
Not really. So it's interesting to look at what is related with Hashimoto's. So one of the things that's very tightly linked is autoimmune gut conditions. Okay, so you know, before I mentioned Helicobacter pylori, which is a very common bacterial stomach infection, and it's present in 50% of the population worldwide. And it can go on to lead to issues, everything all the way up to stomach cancer. You know, so I'm sort of saying, look, yes, it's present in people. Is it good or bad? It's probably very much driven by context. In Hashimoto's clients, there'll be about a 70% presence of Helicobacter rather than a 50%. And they've done studies where they have actually treated the Helicobacter pylori. So they've had scientists or doctors treat that with pretty standard style therapies, which is like a triple or quad therapy of antibiotics and proton pump inhibitors and bismuth, and successfully treat the Helicobacter. And at the same time, what's happened is they've dropped the autoantibodies of the Hashimoto's by 60 to 70% in 30 days.
Shit.
Yeah. And so this is one of the ways, and this is what I've said, I think, that we're getting this resolution of the autoantibodies with thyroid. I get the feeling that some of the things that we're using for this are actually operating on the gut as well as the thyroid.
Yeah.
You know, and some of the benefit that we're seeing is actually improvements in like some of the aspects of gut health that are interlinked with thyroid. In fact, if you go back a long time, like, I don't know, probably 90s or 80s, they used to actually call, like there used to be like a Title IV. It was called like a gastro-thyro autoimmunity or something like that, because it was such a tight link between it that researchers at the time were basically joining it together, you know, the thyroid gut.
Yeah.
And since then, it's kind of evolved into their own separate things from there. But as we know with the body, which is very complex, a lot of these things are tightly linked together.
Yeah.
So, and then the thing that you will see with autoimmune conditions is, unfortunately, when someone has one autoimmune condition, the chances of them then getting a second or a third becomes much, much higher.
Okay.
So a dysregulated immune system often lends itself to that happening, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. Switching to then, you know, the topic for the young men or the guys, I guess, 30s, 40s, they start to hear the hormone replacement therapy, testosterone replacement therapy. Before we go into the therapy replacement side of things, what are some things that people can be doing if they get their bloods done and testosterone is quite low?
Yeah. The more fundamental things on that are going to be like the lifestyle stuff, you know, so some of the best things that you can be doing is making sure that you're not overweight, that you're physically active, and that you get good enough sleep. Okay, really, really important. Then you start diving down to the things that could make a difference given certain contexts. So there are probably nutrient deficiencies that you probably don't want to have, you know, zinc being one of them, but it's really in the literature only supported by certain groups, you know, like elderlies and things like that. I still think it's highly relevant, you know, when you're looking at your blood work, to take all things into consideration, right? The other thing, sorry, I should have mentioned before, is just not being in a like crazy calorie deficit. So making sure that you're taking care of your inputs versus outputs with your diet. You know, it's like if you've ever looked at the blood work of somebody who's gotten very, very lean, okay, it's not too kind on what you're going to see on their testosterone levels or their thyroid, okay, because the body is doing what the body does, and it only cares about the here and now. And in the here and now, when you're trying to be 4 or 5% body fat, it's not worried about fertility. It's not worried about like, your optimal thyroid function. It's trying to conserve every like
Just to
little
survive.
thing that it can. Yeah. For the time being, wondering
Yeah.
why the hell you're so stupid to be doing whatever you're doing.
You're telling me you're getting up there, getting a tan and putting budgie smugglers on for me to try and do this? Like, come on, man.
Exactly. So anyone who's ever looked at blood work of natural clients who do that, you will understand quite quickly is that you're not keeping yourself in optimal ranges when you do that, because you're doing something that's pretty extraordinary as far as the body goes. So yes. So back to the nutrients. Zinc's one of them that I would be looking at. Boron is potentially another one. It can work on the sex hormone binding globulin, which is kind of like the chaperone protein to testosterone.
Yep.
So, lowering that and freeing up bound testosterone for you as well. I think when you look at the botanicals, really the superstar is Tonkat Ali.
Yep.
It does actually have a decent enough amount of evidence on it now for me to sort of say publicly, I'm like, yeah, look, based on what we've got, like it's probably worth a shot if you would like to.
But it's still, as a reminder, an icing on the cake sort of thing in comparison, or is it actually?
It's hard to tell. I've had some pretty significant improvements actually
cool.
with Daddy guys on Tonkat Ali.
Yeah.
Like doubling in certain situations, from low testosterone, free testosterone levels. But it's hard to tell because it's not like I'm running a well-controlled study in which we're only pulling one lever.
Yeah.
It's not like you come to me and pay all this money and I go, there you go, and get to walk away.
And you become a guru.
Here's my affiliate link. It's like, no, like you're helping them on multiple fronts, like, correcting diet, like working on stress strategies and behavioral things and sleep strategies and stuff. And then it's like, yes, let's go and, put this Tonkat Ali formula in here as well. And so to what level of contribution came from that and the others, it's really hard to tease out. But I'm confident enough to say, based on what we know with studies and what I've got in clinical, that it can very much be a positive for that.
Is there a risk of a natural person that isn't, obviously, we said natural, they're not injecting themselves with any sort of testosterone or anything like that, having an elevated levels of testosterone? Is like, I mean, it's probably pretty hard to achieve extremes, but if you're going above what the normal sort of range is?
I don't really know if you're going to really do that with something like Tonkat Ali.
Yeah.
So, and it depends what you mean by the extremes, right? So, and what I mean by that is like, so the reference ranges for testosterone for males, at least here in Australia, a lot of the pathologies that we look at, they're pretty low now. I'm pretty sure I saw one the other day where like the top end was like 800 or 750 or something like that.
And what relative to what?
And I was like, I've been telling my guys for years, I'm like, we're getting you to 1,000, brother.
Yeah, okay.
We're going for 1,000,
Whereas a GP might be like, oh.
Yeah, that's right. So now the GP's sitting there going, exactly.
Said to you that I saw a while ago when I had my bloods done, like a year and a half, the GP was like, oh, testosterone's looking a bit high. And I'm like, thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and that's more of a reflection. I mean, that's great for you. Sorry.
Yeah.
But the situation is more of a reflection of that the reference ranges really are in part like come into being from like the averages over time of the populations that are going there and stuff like that. So being in range is got really like not a lot to do with being optimal, and it's becoming less and less as time goes on as we become a sicker population.
Yep. And now I'm not 100% where is it. So you got free within that, you got total test, then free test, and then sex. I've lost
hormone
binding. Yeah. Is that so? Is the ratio between the free test and the sex test, is that an important factor, or are you kind of with total generally things move up together?
Yes, but also no. And what I mean by that is, so really the amount of sex hormone binding globulin that you will have will dictate what's free. Okay. And there are certain situations in which that may be higher than you would like it to be. So for instance, you take you take going on a ketogenic diet, for instance, a low carbohydrate diet. So that will pretty much increase SHBG levels. Okay, so you'll see an increase in those when someone is doing very low carbohydrate or low calorie and stuff like that. And so, and this goes for both males and females as well. And so if you then take that person and there's the opportunity and space to increase their carbohydrate intake or increase their calorie intake, a lot of the time the sheer fact of you doing that alone will help them drop their SHBG levels and increase their free testosterone. Okay. But yeah, I think essentially like, when people ask me what should my levels be, it's all well and good to say, it's great to be in the upper quartile for something like testosterone, but I won't let the men that I work with get too caught up on it just in a number. And what I mean by that is like I have males that, have testosterone in the 500s that feel amazing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They feel amazing. They're like every conversation you could possibly have about like the that has to do with testosterone, they're like green ticks across the board, and then if you got them hooked on trying to be 1,000, that could just be a net negative to their experience, and they can start freaking out over something that's not actually a problem.
Is that where some people, like, especially maybe as they go 30s, 40s, then they start to be like, well, I just need to, jump on TRT. Like, that's the solution. And they jump to conclusions despite being perfectly fine.
That's exactly right, and so... and when I say by that is like the human body is so complex that like what someone gets out of like I've seen males with like natty males with testosterone levels, like younger guys with testosterone levels of 500 that aren't in the middle of the diet, and then other guys at 900 and 1,000, and the muscularity on these guys with 500 like it's far superior to these other guys. And so I'm like, you'd like to think that there's all these like tight like linear relationships with like the levels and what you see, whether it's like building muscle or fertility or libido or whatever it is. But I'm like, it's somewhat there, but somewhat there is a lot of scope for change as well. And so, I think that's just an important thing to recognize.
So when it comes to then that muscle growth, in, like you said, someone with their low test, high test, you can still obviously build muscle, like it's still going to happen as well. What's a realistic, scope and a time frame for a natural person to expect to see some decent results and muscle gain, considering you still have to train at a decent intensity and the other factors are met as well?
Do you mean this in relation to testosterone at all? Or?
No, so just more. Testosterone was just saying, regardless of what your testosterone is,
yes. Okay.
What's a time? Obviously, because like you've said, so you can have people on the lower or the middle range and their upper range, and they're both building muscle.
Yeah.
What's a sort of time frame people are going to expect to be like? I look different. I've put on 5 kilos of lean tissue.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the size of the person as well. You know what I mean? Like you might have like a 60 kilo male versus a 100 kilo male, right? But like when it comes to natural muscle building, I think people just have to have far more conservative expectations than what's probably shown to them on social media a lot. That's the unfortunate thing about when you look for motivation or inspiration or expertise even on social media. Sometimes you're looking at either the genetically elite or the ones with like an utmost amount of willpower, and they've got an environment or a career that's dependent on this, and so it's far easier if you have like either or all of those situations to build as much muscle as possible in the shortest amount of time frame and splash it all over a social media platform, versus some of the general population people that we would work with, right? And so, I sort of say to my guys, and I'm like, look, I think going through a muscle accrual phase and looking at, very minor kind of like 0.2 kilos per week, so 200 grams per week, is something that I'll often start with, providing they're sort of lean enough to where we want them to begin with,
to ensure that they're not just putting on too much fat as well, like it's just turned into a big beefcake.
Exactly. But I sort of say, look, over a 12-month journey, what may that look like? And I'm like, well, if you multiply that out, then that's going to be 2 kilos in 10 weeks, 4 kilos at 20 weeks, we're nearly at half a year, right? I go, are you going to put on 8 kilos of solid muscle in that first year? Probably not, unless you're a big dude, right? Or very, very genetically gifted. But I think it's probably somewhere within that range of like 3 to 8 kilos is very feasible, depending on how big you are.
Is that then you're looking at maybe 6 to 12 kilos of weight in that time frame? Like like it's you're going to put on some extra weight that isn't just muscle, especially as a natural person as well.
Exactly.
That isn't dedicating your whole life to training.
Yeah, exactly. And like it depends, right? So if you have someone who's got a long-term goal of like, let's say they wanted to do a bodybuilding thing, they may be a little bit more willing to grow for longer without, having photo shoot ready abs and stuff like that, right? It's like, no. Like, I need to get a lot bigger than what I am right now. I need to go the journey. Whereas a lot of general pop people won't want that. And so they'll want to do the gain, but at that 24-week mark, they might sort of say, oh, hey, look, I'm feeling a bit fluffy. I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable. Can we go through like a bit of a dieting phase? And you as the coach have got that decision to make with them and go, in my case, I'd be like, yeah, let's do it. Like, let's trim off this fat, basically.
Yeah.
Unveil what we've done, but without doing it so much that we sort of like start, kind of like eating down too much of that muscle tissue as well. And there's this, depending on your coaching practices and stuff like that, there's this point of like, hey, we're happy with this. Are you ready to go back into this muscle building phase now? And so over a given 12-month time frame with a natural client who's fairly new to training, like, there may be a break for that throughout it.
Yeah.
And there may not. It really depends on how, the faster you go, the more likely you're going to need to break it sometimes because you're going to accumulate more fat. The slower you go, you're probably going to accumulate less fat.
So it's just you're balancing up priorities at that stage as well. Like it's, and once again, knowing personally from experience with PT and general pop sort of thing, they need to see something because it's very hard. Like if you took a gen pop person and they took like a 45-year-old dude, accountant, and you wait 12 months for them to be like, oh, I can see some of what I've put on.
Yeah.
They're out the door probably before you got to 12 months. So that 4 months and then let's drop a little bit just to be like, oh, I can see, there's a little vein there or there's an insert, I can see that. You have to motivate people. And if you're a coach, you got to be smart about how you play into the person in front of you.
Yes.
Whereas if you're an individual that's doing it on your own, then maybe you're a bit more intrinsically motivated and you can drag out that time horizon a little bit more as well.
I absolutely agree with you. And like, it's something I find really interesting particularly as like an evidence-based kind of coach or practitioner, right? Is like, you're probably going to feel a tug in both directions all the time when you're working with clients like this, because you may want to do the slow and steady because like let's take dieting for a second. Sorry, I'm going to flip it.
No.
I think it just makes for a better discussion. So if you did a slow and steady with a client, we know that a drop of this much body weight percentage per week is really good. It's going to mean that like we're going to have like the lowest hunger problems, probably the lowest craving problems. We're going to be able to control performance in the gym for longest. We're going to be able to control systemic fatigue and stuff like that. And then you got a client who leaves you because you took too long to get where you were going.
I just wanted to lose weight.
That's exactly right. Okay. And so this is why, because I coach a lot of young coaches as well. And I'm just like, oi, it's really fine to like be having these sort of things in your head going, I don't know what to do here. Like, do I go aggressive? But if I go aggressive, am I going to wreck their hormones? Or if I go slow, am I going to, everyone else is doing these like quick cut results. And, I feel like they get all the leads and I don't because I'm doing this evidence-based stuff. And I'm like, listen, you have to kind of understand that in the real world and real practice, you basically take your understandings and put them into best practices.
And I think understanding that evidence-based is not just nutrition data, it's psychology data and things like that as well. Like true evidence-based is here, not here. Yeah. Like it's, and for anyone that's just listening, it's like playing the bigger field, not the smaller field. Like you got to look at all different avenues when you're dealing, especially with general population clients.
Absolutely. And you'll have clients who are like polar opposites in terms of like their personalities and their expectations, right? You'll have like Bob who's like, love the slow and steady thing. And then you got Bill who's just like, he's out of there if you don't show him his abs in 12 weeks time. Yeah. And so it's about knowing how to navigate both of those. And like there's certain clients like that may have that expectation that's just too wild. And then it's your job to either say, no, like get real, this is how we're going to do it. Or see you later because I'm not going to coach you because what you're asking is stupid. But inevitably I feel like that's we are threading the needle a lot with that, and that's one of the things that I've tried to be vocal about, particularly to newer coaches who have somewhat bagged out the diet culture in the sense of like the 8-week or 12-week transformation, like more aggressive caloric deficits off the bat. And they've taken the position of the other way. And I'm just like, look, at the end of the day, I think what you've got to understand is like from a motivational standpoint and like a client sort of like getting skin in the game to then kind of like gain consistency. Sometimes you've got to show them this first, and I think that sometimes people overestimate the the deleterious effects of doing like a aggressive diet. You know, like I'm old now, man. So like for me, for instance, like I've done like my last bodybuilding prep was 7 months. You know, it was a slow prep, right? But it was great. I got to recomp. I did some crazy training. I started at 91 kilos, like 10% body fat. I ended up on stage at 99 kilos.
Yeah, shit.
You know what I mean? So
like, how's this happening?
It was a crazy, man. I'd never done a prep like that, right? But everything just kind of came together in that last year, and it was a lot of effort though. I forgot where I was going with that. Sorry, I lost my train.
That's right. I was going to say I think also to our point that we've said a couple of times in different circumstances as well, the 8 to 10 week challenges are good and bad. When are they good? They're good when you follow up.
Yeah.
When are they bad? When you go 8 week challenge, you lost the weight, have a good life. And you're like, well, fuck, now I'm just going to put it back on because like I need a bit more holding of my hand for a little bit longer. Whereas if we went, hey, we're going to do like, this is something that someone could steal this if they want. I want to try and build this with what I'm doing is like, think of a way, how can I maybe do these things with the 8, 10 week challenge, 16, whatever, give away prizes, do whatever, get people razzed up and going, but then create some systems and some things that actually, hey, we also run a 6-month challenge off the back of this, which is the bigger prize, the bigger award, because over 6 months then, whether then they're, you know, motivated by the award or not, they've probably created the habits that they're going to sustain now for 6, 10, 15 years. Once again, depending on lifestyle factors and things like that. But it's like adding that one more layer to the challenge is the long-term challenge as well as the 8-week challenge.
Absolutely. Yep. I totally agree.
And it will solve a lot of problems. Well, I think we might have to wrap things up there. That's been really, really helpful.
Yep.
Let you get on with the rest of your day. So for anyone that's looking to work with Ben, all his information will be below in the description. And we'll leave it there. Appreciate it, Ben. Thank you very much. Thank you.